In 1884, a train pulled into the station at Copper Ridge, Montana, carrying a secret that would scandalize the territory. Gideon Holt, the richest cattle baron in the state, stood on the platform waiting for Lillian O'Doyle, a Boston beauty he had purchased through a high-stakes correspondence arrangement to be his trophy wife. But when the veil was lifted, Lillian wasn't there. Instead, standing in the dust was her older sister, Martha, a woman scarred by fire and rejected by society, sent by her father as a cruel joke to keep Gideon's money. What happened next wasn't a tragedy, but a vengeance that birthed a dynasty. This is the true story of the Iron Creek Deception. Boston, Massachusetts. March 1884. The scent of boiled cabbage and wet coal clung to the walls of the O'Doyle tenement, a grim, sensory reminder of the family's fall from grace. Patrick O'Doyle sat at the chipped oak table, his hands trembling not from age, but from the distinct rattling of a man who owed money to the wrong sort of people in the Irish slums. Across from him sat Martha. She was 26, an age considered ancient for an unwed woman in late Victorian society, particularly one with no dowry. She sat with her left profile turned away from the flickering gas lamp, a habit ingrained since childhood. The left side of her face bore the jagged, shiny ridges of a burn scar, a souvenir from a kitchen fire that had consumed half their home 15 years prior. "You have no choice, Maddie," Patrick said, his voice grating like rough sandpaper. He wouldn't look her in the eye. He was staring at the letter of credit on the table, a draft for $5,000, signed by a man named Gideon Holt. "It is fraud, Papa," Martha said, her voice steady, possessing a timbre of steel that her father lacked. "Mr. Holt paid for Lillian. He possesses a daguerreotype of Lillian. He expects a blue-eyed girl with skin like milk, not." She gestured vaguely to her own face, to the scar, and her frame, which was broad-shouldered and imposing, built for labor rather than parlor sitting. "Lillian is gone." Patrick slammed his hand on the table. "Run off with that Italian boot polisher. She's halfway to New York by now. But the money, Maddie, the money is spent." Martha felt the cold sink into her stomach. "You spent the bride price?" "The sharks were at the door," Patrick hissed. "If I didn't pay the debts, they would have taken my legs. Now, Gideon Holt is expecting a bride on the noon train tomorrow. If no one steps off that train, he sends the law. He sends men to reclaim his investment. I will be in prison, or dead. So you send me as a placeholder?" Martha stood up. She towered over her father. "To be humiliated? When he lifts that veil, he will toss me into the mud." "He is a rancher in the Montana Territory," Patrick pleaded, grabbing her wrist with desperate, sweaty fingers. "They say he is rough, uncivilized. Maybe he won't notice the difference in the dark. Maybe he needs a worker more than a statue. You are strong, Maddie. You can cook, you can stitch, you can read the books Lillian never touched." He ordered a wife, not a housekeeper. Martha pulled her arm away. "Please." Patrick began to weep, a pathetic, heaving sound. "Just go. Wear the heavy veil. Don't speak until the vows are said. Once the ink is dry, he can't send you back without a scandal that would ruin his reputation too. It's your duty, girl. You're the one who knocked the lamp over all those years ago. You owe this family." It was a lie. Lillian had knocked the lamp over during a tantrum, and Martha had shoved her out of the way, taking the oil and flame to her own face. But Martha had carried the guilt for her father's sake for 15 years. She looked at the suitcase by the door. It contained Lillian's silk dresses, garments that would strain against Martha's wider hips and taller frame. It was a suicide mission. She was being sent like a defective product in false packaging to a man known as the Iron Wolf of Montana. "I will go," Martha whispered, the resignation tasting like ash in her mouth. "But not for you. I go because there is nothing left for me in this house but lies." The journey west was a blur of soot and rattling carriages. While other mail-order brides in her car chattered about romance and gold, Martha sat in silence, her heavy lace veil already pinned in place. She felt like a funeral attendee at her own wake. She read the letters Gideon Holt had sent Lillian. They were brief, transactional, and commanded authority. I require a woman of breeding to host dignitaries. The ranch is expanding. You will have servants, but you will maintain order. I tolerate no dishonesty. The irony made her want to vomit. She was walking into the lion's den wrapped in the biggest lie of all. Copper Ridge, Montana Territory. April 1884. The train screeched to a halt, the steam hissing violently against the crisp, cold mountain air. Copper Ridge was not a shanty town. It was a booming hub of cattle commerce. The station was built of red brick, signifying permanence and wealth. Martha O'Doyle stepped onto the wooden platform, clutching her carpetbag. The wind was ferocious, immediately whipping at her skirts. She held the heavy veil down with one hand, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Miss O'Doyle?" The voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of warmth. Martha turned. Standing near a polished black carriage was a man who looked as if he had been carved from the granite of the mountains behind him. Gideon Holt was a giant of a man, well over 6 feet tall, wearing a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored but struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. He wore a black Stetson low over his eyes. His face was handsome, but hard weather-beaten skin, a jaw covered in a shadow of dark stubble, and eyes the color of cold steel. He did not smile. He looked at her, assessing the merchandise. "I am Gideon Holt," he said, stepping forward but not offering a hand. "You are taller than your letters suggested." Martha nodded, afraid that her voice would betray the deception instantly. She curtsied, a stiff, awkward movement. "The trip was long?" he asked. "Arduous, sir," she managed to whisper. He seemed to pause at the sound of her voice. It was lower, huskier than he likely expected from the delicate handwriting in Lillian's letters Martha knew her sister had copied from a book of etiquette. "Let's get the trunk." "The weather is turning," Gideon signaled to a station porter. He didn't wait for her. He turned on his heel and marched toward the carriage. The ride to the ranch known as Iron Creek took 2 hours. The landscape was breathtakingly brutal, vast plains rolling into jagged peaks capped with snow. Gideon spoke only of business. He explained the number of head of cattle, 10,000, the size of the land, 40,000 acres, and the expectations. "I have a foreman, Dutch van der Hoven. He handles the men. You will handle the house. The governor dines with us next month. I need the place to be civilized. That is what I paid for." Paid for. The words hung in the air. When the carriage pulled up to the main house, Martha gasped. It wasn't a cabin. It was a 2-story manor made of timber and stone, with a wraparound porch and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to ship west. Gideon helped her down. His grip was firm, his hands calloused despite the fine suit. He led her into the foyer, which was illuminated by a crystal chandelier. "Dutch!" Gideon bellowed. A wiry, older man with a gray mustache appeared from the hallway. "Boss." "She arrived safe?" "She's here," Gideon said. He turned to Martha. "Now, Miss O'Doyle, we have the justice of the peace coming at sunset. But first, let me see the face of the woman who will bear the Holt name." This was it. The moment of execution. Martha's hands shook as she reached up to the pins securing the thick lace. She closed her eyes. "Let him yell," she thought. "Let him strike me. Just get it over with." She pulled the veil away. Silence. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. It was heavier than the scream she had anticipated. Martha opened her eyes. Gideon was staring at her. His expression hadn't shifted into rage, but rather into a frozen, confused shock. He looked at the daguerreotype he had taken from his breast pocket, the picture of Lillian, and then back at Martha. He looked at the scar on her left cheek. He looked at her square jaw. He looked at her brown, frightened eyes. "Who the hell are you?" Gideon's voice was a low growl, dangerous and vibrating with suppressed violence. "I am Martha O'Doyle," she said, lifting her chin, refusing to cower now that the truth was out. "Lillian's sister. I purchased a contract for Lillian O'Doyle." Gideon stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I paid $5,000 to Patrick O'Doyle for his daughter Lillian. Where is she?" "She is gone," Martha said. She refused to come. My father. The money was spent. He sent me. Gideon laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dark, terrifying sound. A bait-and-switch. Like selling a man a thoroughbred and delivering a plow horse. The insult stung, but Martha latched onto the pain to fuel her courage. I am not a horse, Mr. Holt. I am a woman, and I am here. You are a fraud, Gideon snarled. He turned to Dutch. Get the carriage back out. Take her back to the station. Train's gone, boss, Dutch said quietly, looking at Martha with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Next one ain't till Tuesday. And look outside. Gideon looked out the window. The sky had turned a bruised purple. The wind was howling. A spring blizzard, the kind that killed unwary travelers, was descending rapidly. I won't have a liar in my house. Gideon slammed his hand against the wall. I can work, Martha blurted out. I can cook better than Lillian. I can sew. I can read your ledgers. I know you need a wife for the governor's visit. You need the appearance of stability. Send me back on Tuesday if you must, but don't throw me into the snow. Gideon turned back to her. He walked until he was inches from her face. She could smell tobacco and rain on him. He studied her scar with a brutal intensity that made her want to weep, but she held his gaze. You think you can play the lady of the manor? Gideon sneered. With that face? You think the governor won't ask why Gideon Holt married a scarred spinster instead of the beauty he promised? Tell them I was burned, saving a child. Martha lied, her mind racing. Tell them it's a mark of character. Tell them whatever you want. But I am the only O'Doyle you have. Gideon stared at her for a long moment. The wind battered the house, shaking the window panes. He cursed under his breath. Dutch, put her in the guest quarters, the servants' quarters. Gideon corrected himself cold-heartedly. She isn't a guest. She is working off a debt until the train arrives. He looked at Martha one last time, his eyes filled with ice. Stay out of my sight. If you steal so much as a silver spoon, I'll have you hanged. He stormed into his study and slammed the door. Martha stood alone in the foyer, her legs trembling. She was alive. She had a roof over her head, but she had just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. The storm that hit Iron Creek that night was recorded in local history as the White Funeral of 1884. For 3 days, the world outside was erased by a wall of white. Martha was relegated to a small room off the kitchen. It was cold, drafty, and smelled of onions. She didn't mind. It was better than the rat-infested tenement in Boston. She didn't weep. She unpacked her meager belongings, 2 sensible dresses, a Bible, and a small kit of medical supplies she had gathered over years of tending to the neighborhood children in the slums. On the second morning, the crisis began. The house was understaffed. The usual cook, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, was stuck in town due to the storm. Gideon and Dutch were the only men in the main house. The ranch hands were bunkered down in the barn, unable to cross the 100 yards of deadly wind to get to the main house. Martha found Gideon in the kitchen, trying to boil coffee. He looked exhausted. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and he was nursing a hand wrapped in a bloody rag. Get out, he grunted when he saw her. You're bleeding, Martha said, ignoring his command. She walked over. Let me see. It's a wire cut. It's fine. It's infected, she observed, noting the red streaks running up his wrist. If the red line reaches your heart, you die. Then who runs the ranch? Gideon glared at her, but he was lightheaded. The fever had set in overnight. He slumped into a chair. I don't need your help. You need a doctor, but the snow is 5 feet deep, Martha said matter-of-factly. She went to her room and returned with her kit. She fetched boiling water and a clean knife. This will hurt, she warned. I've been branded, shot, and kicked, Gideon muttered, eyes closing. Do your worst, plow horse. Martha flinched at the nickname but focused on the wound. She cleaned the jagged cut, lanced the infection with a steady hand, and stitched it up with a precision that would have impressed a surgeon. She made a poultice from dried herbs. She had brought something her grandmother had taught her and bound the hand. For the next 2 days, Gideon was delirious with fever. Martha didn't sleep. She sat by his bedside, wiping his brow with cool cloths, forcing broth down his throat, and keeping the fire stoked. In his delirium, Gideon spoke. He didn't speak of money or cattle. He spoke of a name. Elias. I couldn't save him, Elias. The water was too fast. Gideon murmured, thrashing in the sheets. Martha held his shoulders down. Shh, you are safe. She saw a different man in those hours. Not the Iron Wolf, but a man haunted by a grief so deep it had turned his heart to stone. She wondered who Elias was. A brother? A son? By the 4th morning, the storm broke. The sun shattered against the snow, blindingly bright. Gideon woke up. The fever was gone. He felt weak, but clear-headed. He looked at his hand. It was healing cleanly. He looked around the room. Martha was asleep in a wooden chair in the corner, her head lolling to the side, her scar illuminated by the morning light. He watched her for a long time. She wasn't beautiful in the way Lillian was supposed to be, but she had stayed. She hadn't stolen his money and run into the storm. She had saved his hand, perhaps his life. He sat up, the floorboards creaking. Martha snapped awake instantly, eyes wide with fear. I fell asleep, she stammered, standing up. I'm sorry. I'll go to the kitchen. Stop, Gideon said. His voice was raspy. Martha froze. The train leaves tomorrow, Gideon said. Yes, I am packed. Gideon looked at his bandaged hand. He looked at the ledgers piled on his desk that he had neglected for weeks. He thought about the governor coming. He thought about the empty, cold house that had been his prison since Elias died. The contract was for a wife, Gideon said slowly. A partner to manage the estate, to present a united front. Yes, Martha whispered. You are not what I ordered, Gideon said, his voice hardening again, protecting himself. But I am a pragmatist. I cannot find another bride before the snow melts fully, and I cannot host the governor alone. He stood up, walking toward her. He towered over her, but this time, he didn't seem quite as threatening. I propose a new deal. You stay. You play the part of Mrs. Holt. You run this house. You keep your distance from me personally. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. In exchange, I pay off your father's debts fully, so the sharks don't take his legs, and I give you a stipend. Martha looked at him. It was a cold offer, a loveless marriage, but it was safety. It was a purpose, and, strangely, after seeing him vulnerable in the fever, she felt a tug in her chest she couldn't explain. And if I refuse, then Dutch takes you to the train in an hour. Martha squared her shoulders. I have conditions. Gideon raised an eyebrow. You are in no position to negotiate. I am the one who stitched your hand, she countered. Condition 1. You never call me plow horses again. My name is Martha. Condition 2. I am allowed to ride. I will not be a prisoner in this house. Gideon stared at her. A flicker of something respect crossed his eyes. Agreed, he said. Get dressed, Martha. The justice of the peace will be here by noon. We have a lie to construct. May 1884. The wedding had been a sterile affair, conducted by a shivering justice of the peace in the ranch's parlor, while the last of the blizzard howled outside. No rings were exchanged, only signatures on a document that legally bound Martha O'Doyle to Gideon Holt. Since that day, they had lived like ghosts, haunting the same castle, circling each other with polite nods and silence. Gideon slept in the master suite. Martha took the guest room down the hall, but the silence was about to be broken. Governor Sullivan was arriving in 3 hours. Martha stood before the tall oval mirror in her room, her breath shallow against the constriction of a corset she hadn't worn in years. The dress was a deep midnight blue silk, ordered by Gideon from a catalog in San Francisco weeks prior. It was expensive, elegant, and cut high at the neck, a deliberate choice Martha had requested to hide the scarring that trailed down her neck. You look like a queen, Miss Martha, said Dutch, who was standing by the open door, holding a pair of polished boots. The old foreman had taken a shining to her, respecting the way she managed the household budget, and wasn't afraid to slaughter a chicken herself. "I look like a fraud in expensive wrapping," Martha muttered, smoothing the silk over her hips. "Does the dress fit the role of a cattle baron's wife?" "It fits the role of Gideon's wife," Dutch said, his voice dropping. "He's been pacing the porch for an hour. He's nervous. Rourke is coming with the governor." Martha froze. "Rourke? The man who owns the Double Bar Ranch?" "Beaufort Rourke," Dutch nodded grimly. "He's a snake. Wanted Gideon's water rights for 10 years. If he sees weakness tonight, if he senses this marriage is a sham, he won't," Martha said, turning from the mirror. Her eyes, usually soft, hardened with resolve. She reached for a velvet ribbon and tied it around her throat, masking the last of the burn marks. She pulled her hair to the right side, leaving the scarred left cheek exposed but shadowed. She would not hide her face. If Gideon was the Iron Wolf, she would be steel. When she descended the staircase, the house was already buzzing. The long dining table was set with silver. Martha had spent 3 days polishing. The chandeliers blazed. Gideon stood at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a tuxedo that made his broad shoulders look even more formidable. He was nursing a tumbler of whiskey, his eyes dark and unreadable. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up. He didn't gasp. Gideon Holt wasn't a man given to theatrics, but his hand tightened around the glass. He watched her descend, step by step, his gaze lingering not on the silk or the jewels, but on the way she held her head high. "You are ready," he said, his voice gravelly. "I am," Martha replied, stopping on the final step so she was eye level with him. "Dutch tells me Rourke is coming." He invited himself. "He's the governor's largest donor," Gideon grimaced. "He'll try to bait you. He knows I ordered a bride. He expects a simpleton or a doll. Don't let him rattle you. I grew up in the Boston slums, Gideon." Martha adjusted his lapel, a bold move that made him flinch slightly before he settled into her touch. "I've dealt with loan sharks and street thugs. A rich man in a waistcoat doesn't frighten me." Gideon stared at her hand on his chest. For a moment, the air between them crackled with something that wasn't business. "Good," he murmured. "Stay close to me." The evening began with a tension that was palpable. Governor Sullivan was a boisterous, red-faced man who laughed too loud, but Beaufort Rourke was a different creature entirely. He was slim, elegant, and possessed a smile that didn't reach his reptilian eye. During dinner, Rourke sat across from Martha, watching her like a hawk circling a field mouse. "So, Mrs. Holt," Rourke said, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "I hear you are from Boston. Quite a change from the city to the savage frontier. Did you come for the scenery or the opportunity?" The implication was clear. Gold digger. Gideon's jaw clenched, and he prepared to speak, but Martha placed a calming hand on his forearm. "Boston is crowded, Mr. Rourke," Martha said smoothly, her voice carrying a cultured lilt she had practiced. "It is a city of noise. I found that I preferred the honesty of the mountains. Here, the dangers are visible: wolves, storms, gravity. In the city, the dangers wear suits and smile while they pick your pocket." The table went silent. Governor Sullivan chuckled nervously. Rourke's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "A sharp tongue," Rourke noted, his eyes narrowing on her scar. "And a history, I see. That mark, a childhood accident?" It was a rude, direct attack. Gideon started to stand up, his chair scraping violently against the floorboards. "Rourke, a fire," Martha interrupted, her voice steady, though her heart hammered. She turned her face so the light hit the scar fully, refusing to look away. "I pulled my sister from a burning room when I was 12. It reminds me daily that life is fragile, and that loyalty costs something. What scars do you carry, Mr. Rourke? Or do you let others bleed for you?" The governor burst into genuine laughter, clapping his hands. "By God, Gideon, she's got teeth. "You found a match, man. A true pioneer woman." Gideon slowly sat back down, but he wasn't looking at Rourke. He was looking at Martha with an expression of profound shock. He had expected her to crumble. Instead, she had just eviscerated his greatest enemy with a few sentences. Later, as the string quartet played in the parlor, Gideon approached her. The guests were mingling, but he pulled her into a quiet alcove near the library. "You didn't save your sister," Gideon said quietly. "You told me Lillian ran away. You told me she was the selfish one." "The story I told the table was true in spirit," Martha whispered, looking down. "I took the blame for the fire. It was Lillian's fault. But my father, he couldn't bear for his perfect daughter to be flawed. So I took the scars, and she took the praise. That is the way of my family." Gideon reached out. His large, rough hand hovered for a moment, before he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing the edge of the scar tissue. His touch was electric, sending a jolt through her that nearly made her knees buckle. "Then your father is a fool," Gideon said, his voice low and intense. He threw away the diamond and kept the glass. Martha looked up, breathless. "Gideon, they are playing a waltz," he said, stepping back, his walls slamming back up, though his eyes remained heated. "We must dance, for appearances." He led her to the floor. As he placed his hand on her waist, Martha realized with a terrifying certainty that this was no longer just a business arrangement. She was falling in love with the Iron Wolf, and that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. July 1884. Summer hit the Montana Territory like a hammer. The snowmelt had been generous, yet by July, the creeks running through the Holt land were dwindling to trickles. Gideon was rarely at the house. He was out on the range from dawn until dusk, riding the perimeter, his mood darkening with every inch the water receded. Martha ran the house with efficiency, but she felt his absence. The moment in the alcove at the party had not been repeated. Gideon had retreated into himself, the ghost of Elias standing between them like a physical barrier. One sweltering Tuesday, Martha sat in the study, reviewing the geological maps she had found in Gideon's library. She traced the blue line of Iron Creek. It flowed from the high peaks, through federal land, then through Rourke's property, and finally into the Holt Valley. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured. Dutch walked in, dusting dirt from his hat. "What doesn't, Mrs. Holt?" "The water levels," Martha pointed to the map. "We had record snowfall. The aquifer should be bursting, but the creek is dry." "It's not a drought, Dutch. It's a blockage." Dutch frowned, leaning over the desk. "The creek runs through Rourke's northern canyon before it hits us. It's rough country. Box canyons, hard to ride. If Rourke dams the water up there," Martha said, her mind racing, "he starves our cattle. He forces Gideon to sell the land for pennies on the dollar." "Boss is out at the south pasture," Dutch said. "He won't be back till nightfall. Then we go to him." Martha stood up. "Saddle 2 horses. Mrs. Holt." Gideon gave strict orders. "I am his wife, not his prisoner." Martha snapped, grabbing her riding coat. "And if I'm right, we don't have time for orders. The herd will be dead in a week." They rode out within the hour. Martha sat a horse surprisingly well. Her sturdy frame was suited for the endurance required. They found Gideon near the southern ridge, staring at a dry creek bed, his face a mask of despair. When he saw Martha riding up, his expression shifted to anger. "What are you doing here?" "It's 100 degrees in the shade, Martha." "The water isn't gone, Gideon. It's been stolen," she shouted over the wind. She explained her theory, showing him the map she had shoved into her saddlebag. Gideon studied the map, his eyes narrowing. "That's federal land just above Rourke's cut. If he dammed it there, it's illegal. He doesn't care about the law," Gideon spat. "He cares about breaking me." He looked at her. "Go back to the house." "No," Martha said. "I found it. I'm coming with you." Gideon looked ready to argue, but he saw the set of her jaw. It was the same look she had worn when she stitched his hand. He nodded once. Stay behind me. If shooting starts, you ride for the timber. Understood? They rode north, climbing into the jagged foothills. The heat was oppressive. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking the Box Canyon. There, glistening in the sun, was a man-made reservoir. Rourke's men had dynamited the canyon walls, creating a rock slide that effectively dammed the creek, pooling the water on Rourke's side and leaving the Holt land dry. That son of a bitch, Gideon whispered. Suddenly, a rifle crack echoed through the canyon. Dust kicked up near Gideon's horse. Ambush, Dutch yelled. Gideon drew his Winchester from the scabbard in one fluid motion. Get back, into the rocks. They scrambled off their horses, taking cover behind a cluster of boulders. Bullets chipped away at the stone. 3 men were firing from the ridge above the dam. They have the high ground, Gideon gritted out, levering around. He fired back, the sound deafening. We're pinned. Martha pressed her back against the rock, her heart thundering. She wasn't a soldier. But she noticed something. The rock slide acting as the dam was unstable. The water pressure behind it was immense. Gideon, she grabbed his arm. The dynamite! Do you have any in the saddlebags? I keep a stick for clearing stumps, but throw it at the base of the slide, she pointed. Not at the men, at the dam. Gideon looked at the dam, then at the distance. It's a long throw. And I have to break cover to do it. I'll draw their fire, Dutch said, raising his pistol. No, Gideon growled. I go. He looked at Martha. For a split second, the mask dropped completely. There was fear there not for himself, but for leaving her alone. If I go down, you take Dutch's horse and you run. Don't look back. You won't go down, she said fiercely. Gideon surged up. Dutch opened fire, creating a distraction. Gideon sprinted across the gap, bullets whining past him. He lit the fuse, his arm winding back, and hurled the dynamite stick with all the strength of the Iron Wolf. It sailed through the air, landing perfectly in the crevice of the makeshift dam. Gideon dove behind a fallen log just as the explosion ripped the air. It wasn't a large explosion, but it didn't need to be. It dislodged the Keystone Rock. The pressure of the water did the rest. With a roar like a dragon waking up, the dam burst. Thousands of gallons of water surged forward, washing away the debris and crashing down the creek bed toward the Holt Ranch. The gunmen on the ridge, seeing their prize destroyed, mounted their horses and fled. Gideon lay still behind the log. Gideon, Martha screamed, breaking cover and running to him. He rolled over, coughing, covered in dust. He looked up at her, his face smeared with dirt, and grinned. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. It transformed his face, taking 10 years off his age. We did it, he wheezed. Martha fell to her knees beside him, adrenaline crashing into relief. She grabbed his face in her hands, checking for wounds. You foolish, stubborn man. Gideon didn't pull away. He covered her hands with his own. The roar of the rushing water was deafening, but in that small space between them, it was quiet. You ride well, Martha, he said, softy. And you think like a general. I think like a survivor, she replied. They camped there that night, too exhausted to make the ride back in the dark. Dutch took the first watch, leaving Gideon and Martha by the fire. The sky was a blanket of stars, vast and terrifyingly beautiful. They sat close, their shoulders touching. Elias, Gideon said suddenly. The name hung in the air. Martha didn't speak. She waited. He wasn't my son, Gideon said, staring into the flames. He was my younger brother. I raised him. Our parents died on the wagon trail. I was 18, he was 6. I built this ranch for him. I wanted to give him a legacy. He took a breath, a shudder running through his frame. 3 years ago, during the spring flood, he tried to cross the creek to save a calf. The current took him. I was there. I reached for him. Gideon looked at his hands. I wasn't strong enough. The river took him. That's why I hate the water, and that's why I needed a wife. Not for love, but because without an heir, without family, The ranch dies with me. And if the ranch dies, Elias died for nothing. Martha turned to him, her heart breaking. She understood now. The coldness, the anger, it wasn't cruelty. It was armor. You are not alone, Gideon, she whispered. You have the land, and you have me. For as long as the contract holds, Gideon turned his head. He looked at her scar, silver in the moonlight. The contract, he murmured. He leaned in. The movement was slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, tentative, rough, tasting of smoke and whiskey. It wasn't the kiss of a fairy tale prince. It was the kiss of a desperate man finding a lifeline in the dark. Martha closed her eyes and kissed him back, pouring all her secret longing into it. For a moment, the deception didn't exist. The lie about Lillian didn't exist. There was only the fire and the man who was beginning to see her. But as they pulled apart, breathless, the sound of hoofbeats echoed in the distance, not from the direction of the ranch, but from the north. A rider approached, waving a white flag. It was a messenger from Rourke. Gideon stood up, hand on his gun. The messenger tossed a leather satchel onto the ground and rode off without a word. Gideon opened the satchel. Inside was a single envelope. He tore it open. Martha watched his face change. The softness from the kiss evaporated, replaced by a look of confusion. And then, slowly, a dawn of horrific realization. "What is it?" she asked, her blood running cold. Gideon held up a photograph. It was a new picture, taken recently in a studio in New York. It showed a beautiful woman with fair skin and unblemished features, holding a newspaper dated from last week. "It's a letter from a private investigator Rourke hired," Gideon said, his voice sounding dead. "He found Lillian O'Doyle. She's in New York." He turned the photo over. On the back, in Rourke's handwriting, it read, "I know you are sleeping with a fraud, Gideon. Give me the water rights, or I tell the whole territory that the great Gideon Holt was duped by a scarred Ugly's whore. And then I'll have the sheriff arrest her for identity theft." Gideon looked at Martha. The intimacy of the campfire was gone, shattered by the truth she had tried to outrun. "Rourke knows," Gideon said. "And now, I have a choice to make." The moonlight seemed to turn to ice. Martha stood there, the taste of his kiss still on her lips, knowing that the morning sun might bring her end. "August omie opsute obsech, shipatru." The ride back to the ranch from the blasted dam was a funeral procession. The victory over the water rights felt like ash in Martha's mouth. Gideon rode ahead, his posture rigid, the distance between them now spanning more than just the length of a horse. When they arrived at the main house, the sun was beginning to bleed red across the horizon. But the ranch was not empty. A black carriage sat in the driveway. Standing beside it was Beaufort Rourke, flanked by Sheriff Miller, a good man, but one bound by the letter of the law. And next to them stood a woman in a powder blue traveling suit, holding a parasol to shield her porcelain skin from the dying sun. Martha's breath hitched. She stopped her horse, her hands gripping the reins until her knuckles turned white. It was Lillian. She looked exactly as she had in the daguerreotype, perhaps even more beautiful. Her golden hair was pinned up in the latest New York fashion. Her waist was impossibly small, and her eyes were a piercing, innocent blue. She looked like a china doll placed in the dirt. Gideon dismounted slowly. He didn't look at Martha. He walked toward the group, his spurs jingling in the silence. "Sheriff," Gideon nodded, ignoring Rourke. "Gideon," Sheriff Miller tipped his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Rourke here has made some serious accusations. Concerning your wife?" Rourke stepped forward, a smug smile plastering his face. "Not his wife, Sheriff. This woman," he pointed a gloved finger at Martha, who remained frozen on her horse, "is an imposter. A fraud. She intercepted the contract meant for her sister, likely by force." Rourke turned to the woman in blue. "Miss Lillian O'Doyle, is that your sister?" Lillian looked up at Martha. There was no love in her eyes, only a calculation. Martha knew why she was here. Rourke had found her, likely in a tenement or a brothel in New York, and offered her more money than she had ever seen to come here and play the victim. Yes, Lillian said, her voice high and breathy. That is Martha. She was always jealous. Mr. Holt, when the letter came from you, she stole the money Papa gave me for the ticket. She threatened to burn me again if I spoke up. I've been working as a seamstress in Brooklyn, trying to earn my way here to you. Lillian produced a handkerchief and dabbed at dry eyes. I am the one you wrote to, Gideon. I am the one who promised to be your wife. Martha felt the world tilting. It was a lie so bold, so horrific, that she couldn't speak. She looked at Gideon, pleading silently. You know me. You know who I am. Gideon looked from Martha, dusty, scarred, wearing a man's riding coat, to Lillian, who was pristine, beautiful, and soft. He looked at the woman he had ordered, and the woman he had received. The law is clear, Gideon, Rourke pressed, sensing victory. Identity theft, fraud, and extortion. If you annul the marriage now and sign over the water rights to the Northern Canyon as restitution for the deception, I'll convince Miss Lillian not to press charges. Martha can go to jail, or she can leave the territory. It's your choice. It was a trap. A perfect, steel-jawed trap. Gideon turned to Martha. His face was unreadable, the Iron Wolf mask firmly in place. Is it true? He asked, his voice devoid of the warmth she had heard by the fire. Did you steal her ticket? I came to save my father, Martha whispered, her voice breaking. And I stayed. I stayed because I loved you. She couldn't say it. Not in front of them. She admits it, Rourke crowed. Gideon looked at the ground. He kicked a stone with his boot. Sheriff, take her into custody. I need to review the legal documents before I decide on the annulment. Gideon, Martha gasped, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. Take her to the town jail. Miller, Gideon said, turning his back on her. I will entertain Miss Lillian here. We have much to discuss. Dutch stepped forward, his hand on his gun belt. Boss, you can't be serious. She saved your hand. She saved the herd. Stand down, Dutch, Gideon barked. She's a liar, and I don't tolerate liars. Sheriff Miller approached Martha's horse. I'm sorry, ma'am. You have to come with me. Martha didn't fight. She felt hollowed out. As she was led away, she looked back one last time. She saw Gideon offering his arm to Lillian, leading her up the stairs of the house that Martha had made a home. Lillian looked back over her shoulder and smirked, a quick, venomous expression that vanished as soon as Gideon looked at her. Martha rode to town in silence, her heart turning to stone. The jailhouse, Copper Ridge. That night, the cell was cold, but Martha didn't feel it. She sat on the cot, staring at the moon through the iron bars. She had lost everything. Her dignity, her freedom, and the man she loved. Around midnight, the heavy door of the jailhouse creaked open. Sheriff? Martha called out. Sheriff's asleep, a voice whispered. It was Dutch. He appeared at the bars with a set of keys. Boss is a stubborn mule, but he ain't stupid, and neither am I. Dutch, you'll be arrested, Martha hissed as he unlocked the door. Maybe, Dutch grunted, but something ain't right. After you left, Lillian didn't ask about the ranch. She didn't ask about Gideon. She asked about the safe. She asked where the deed to the land was kept. Martha's eyes widened. She's not here to marry him. She's working with Rourke to rob him. Exactly, Dutch said. I tried to tell Gideon, but he's locked in the study with a bottle of whiskey. He sent Lillian to the guest room, but I saw her sneak out the back 10 minutes ago. She met Rourke by the barn. They're going to burn it, Martha realized with a jolt of horror. That's Rourke's final move. If he can't get the land legally, he'll destroy the assets so Gideon goes bankrupt. The insurance won't cover arson. And the wind is blowing toward the house. Dutch added grimly. We have to go. Martha ran out of the cell, grabbing a Winchester from the rack on the wall. She didn't care about the law. She cared about Gideon. They rode back to Iron Creek at a gallop. As they crested the final hill, The sky was already glowing orange. The barn was an inferno. The flames were licking high into the night sky, consuming the dry timber with a roaring hunger, and the wind was driving the sparks directly onto the roof of the main house. "The horses!" Dutch yelled, riding toward the corral to cut the fence. "Gideon!" Martha screamed, riding toward the house. The front door was open. She leaped off her horse and ran inside. The foyer was full of smoke. "Gideon!" She found him in the study. He was slumped over his desk, unconscious. A heavy brass candlestick lay on the floor next to him, and blood was matting his hair. Lillian. She had knocked him out to get the combination to the safe, found it empty, and left him to die in the fire. Martha grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "Gideon, wake up!" He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked dazed. "Martha, you're in jail. The house is burning. Gideon, get up." He tried to stand, but stumbled. The smoke was getting thicker, black and choking. The heat was intensifying as the fire jumped from the barn to the kitchen wing. Martha coughed, her eyes watering. Panic, old and primal, clawed at her throat. The crackling sound. It was the same sound from her childhood. The smell of burning oil, the memory of the pain on her skin. She froze, paralyzed by the trauma. "I can't do this. I can't burn again. Martha." Gideon's voice was weak. He slumped against her, too heavy to carry. If she froze, they both died. She looked at Gideon. She looked at the scar on his hand, the one she had stitched. She looked at the man who had kissed her under the stars. "Not this time," Martha screamed, a raw, guttural sound of defiance. She shoved the fear into a box and locked it. She grabbed Gideon's arm, draped it over her shoulder, and heaved. "Move your legs, damn you!" she shouted. "Walk, Iron Wolf!" She dragged him through the foyer. The ceiling beams were groaning. Fire was eating the curtains in the parlor. They stumbled out the front door and collapsed onto the gravel driveway just as the porch roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. They lay there, gasping for air, the heat searing their backs. "Well, ain't that a picture?" A voice sneered. Martha looked up. Rourke was standing there, holding a torch. Lillian was behind him, clutching a bag of silverware she had stolen. "You are hard to kill, Mrs. Holt," Rourke said, pulling a revolver. "A shame the fire didn't finish the job. Now I have to do it myself." He aimed the gun at Gideon, who was still groggy, trying to clear his head. Martha didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She was still holding the Winchester she had taken from the jail, lying in the dirt beside her. As Rourke cocked the hammer, Martha rolled, brought the rifle up, and fired. The shot echoed louder than the roaring fire. Rourke's hat flew off. He dropped his gun, clutching his shoulder, screaming in shock, more than pain. He hadn't expected the ugly daughter to be a marksman. "Don't move!" Dutch's voice rang out. He came running from the darkness, his own gun drawn, followed by 3 of the ranch hands who had woken up. They surrounded Rourke and Lillian. Lillian dropped the silverware, her hands shaking. "He made me do it. He promised me money." Gideon pushed himself up to a sitting position. He wiped the blood from his forehead. He looked at the burning house, then at Rourke, writhing in the dirt, and finally at Martha. She was kneeling in the dust, the rifle still trained on Rourke, her chest heaving, her scar glowing red in the firelight. She looked like a warrior. Gideon stood up, swaying slightly. He walked over to Martha. He gently took the barrel of the rifle and lowered it. "It's over," he said softly. He turned to Sheriff Miller, who had just ridden up with a posse, drawn by the glow of the fire. "Sheriff," Gideon said, his voice returning to its full, commanding depth. "Mr. Rourke and Miss Lillian attempted to murder me and burn my property. Arrest them." "No," Lillian shrieked as the deputies grabbed her. "Gideon, look at me. I'm the pretty one. She's a monster." Gideon walked over to Lillian. He looked her up and down, his expression one of pure disgust. "You are the ugliest thing I have ever seen," Gideon said. He turned back to Martha. He walked to her, ignoring the fire, ignoring the crowd. He dropped to his knees in the dirt so he was looking up at her. I tried to send you away, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I had to protect the ranch. I thought I had to follow the rules. You were wrong, Martha said, tears finally cutting tracks through the soot on her face. I was. Gideon took her hands. They were rough, scarred, and trembling. You are not the wife I ordered, Martha O'Doyle. You are the wife I needed. You are the wife I choose. The house is gone, Gideon, she whispered, looking at the flaming ruins. It was just wood and stone, Gideon said, cupping her scarred cheek. We will build another. Bigger, stronger. As long as I have you, I am the richest man in the territory. He kissed her, then a kiss of ash and promise, deep and unyielding. The ranch hands cheered. Dutch wiped a tear from his eye. The fire burned, but the Iron Creek dynasty was just beginning. Itzen Babai Josher. 6 years later, the new house at Iron Creek stood completed. It was made of stone that could not burn. On the porch, a little boy named Elias played with a wooden horse. Martha sat in a rocking chair, watching him. She touched the scar on her face, which had faded with time but never disappeared. It didn't matter. To the people of Montana, it was a mark of honor. They called her the Iron Queen. Gideon walked out onto the porch. He looked older, softer around the eyes, but just as strong. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The governor is coming for dinner, he said, smiling. Let him come. Martha smiled back, leaning her head against his hand. I'm ready. And she was. For she was no longer the ugly daughter sent as a joke. She was Martha Holt, the heart of the West, and she was exactly where she belonged. And that is the legend of Martha O'Doyle and Gideon Holt. What started as a cruel deception became one of the greatest love stories of the American frontier. Gideon thought he wanted a trophy, but he found a partner who could walk through fire for him. It's a powerful reminder that while beauty may catch the eye, it is character, loyalty, and courage that capture the heart. Martha's scar wasn't a defect. It was proof of her strength, just as the fire at Iron Creek wasn't an end, but a new beginning. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and the Wild West, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a saga. What would you have done in Gideon's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.